You're now listening to Cashed In.
So welcome to episode 12 of Cashed In. Today we have a special guest, Vic Kustra, a Newcastle native who's now an attorney, a real estate attorney and corporate attorney at Lynch Law Group. So Vic, a lot of Newcastle in the room today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. Happy to be here. Excited.
Yeah. I'm excited to talk about real estate law with you today because the last time we probably talked was in People's Parking Lot in 2008. So a nice reunion today.
This is definitely the I would imagine probably the greasiest episode of the podcast that you've had so far.
That's right.
We like to keep
I'm
it
happy
greasy.
to be a part of it.
Yes, I love that. Michael, I'll let you start off. What questions do you have for Vic?
So Vic, a lot of the viewers that we have, they're just getting started out, right? I know that we talked a little bit before this around, some of like the newbie investors, right? Obviously, deciding, what protections to kind of have in place beforehand, as it relates to different shelters, LLCs, for example, right? If you wanted to touch base just a little bit on that, kind of just how to structure them, and what the reasoning is behind having that protection in place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that's very important. I think a lot of people obviously are familiar with the home buying process to some extent, right? I mean, the general idea. Mm-hmm. You purchase a home, you either live there, or if you don't want to live there, you can rent it out. But I think that a lot of people don't know why certain properties are owned by corporations or by LLCs. You'll see, if you look property records up, you'll see that it's owned by an LLC or some sort of corporate entity. And I know before I started practicing corporate and real estate law, I understood that corporate entities could own properties, but I didn't really know why. Why would somebody want to own or why would a corporation want to own a piece of property? Why wouldn't just an individual own it? And what I've found is that it's very important for several reasons, especially if you're somebody who is new. And it's important if it's your first rental property or your first investment property, or if it's, part of a large real estate, empire that you're already a part of and that you have going. So the main reason that you want to set up some sort of corporate entity to own, an investment property is to shield your personal assets. So let's assume that you own a rental property in your personal name, and whether it's a short-term rental or a long-term rental, you have someone living there, something goes wrong on the property, the homeowner's insurance only, it doesn't cover the total amount of the damages, then your personal assets are on the table to cover the difference. Right?
They go after your personal home,
right?
Your liquid, things like that.
Cars, whatever else you own. That's where you're going to start looking.
And you're saying if something happens, like someone trips and falls.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Anything that happens on the property that might, where your homeowner's insurance might kick in and it might not cover everything. Mm-hmm. So what you want to do is avoid that situation, right? So if something does go wrong, obviously you hope that your insurance covers it, but in the event that it doesn't, you don't want your personal assets to be exposed.
Right.
You want the assets of the company that you created to
so
own
they
the
could
property.
they could take the property if they would, right?
Right.
I mean, if that's the case.
The property is an asset, obviously, that would be
right.
So
say your insurance limits are upwards of $100,000, and you're getting sued, say, for upwards of $200,000, right? So at that point, could you borrow against the property if you would to be able to pay that person, or could they just, in theory, take the whole property?
You could, but it depends on what the property's worth, right?
What the value of the property is, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So if that doesn't cover it, then your personal assets are on the table.
It's on the
things outside of that property. So if you take that same situation, let's say that for example, somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I saw the podcast that you were on talking about this issue, and I'm thinking about buying an investment property. What should I do?" The first thing that you want to do before you do anything is create, in Pennsylvania, an LLC is the best way to do it. It's the easiest way to set up a company to own property. A real estate holding company really is what we refer to it as. It's a pretty easy process, right? You get your filings done, you get your corporate book together, and then you purchase the property in the name of the LLC. Let's take that same situation we just talked about, right? You have one one LLC that owns one piece of property. It's an investment property. Something goes wrong. The insurance doesn't cover the total amount of the damages. The property itself doesn't cover the difference. The individual who sues can't come after your personal assets, your car, your other properties that maybe you own in a different state, anything that would otherwise be tied to that incident on the property cannot come back to you personally.
Okay. So then you do you recommend to your clients to have separate LLCs for each property?
That's a really good question, and you can do it that way. There's something called a series LLC as well. That currently in Pennsylvania you can't create a series LLC. It's not recognized, but what you do is you create them in the state of Delaware.
I was going to ask that,
Yeah.
why people open LLCs in different states.
Yeah.
'Cause some people say, oh, get a car LLC in Utah,
Yeah.
or
I didn't
get
know
a
that.
house LLC in Delaware. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't understand why, but
So every state has different laws, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Delaware has the most favorable corporate laws. When you're talking about owning investment properties on a smaller scale, they don't come quite into play as much as with big time like corporate operations that might involve billion-dollar companies. They're really getting into the nitty-gritty of what the laws say and what's more favorable from a tax standpoint and all those types
Right.
of things. But owning different properties in different LLCs, let's go back to the example that I was discussing, right? But instead of the LLC owning one rental property, let's say that LLC owns 5.
Right.
Okay. And that incident that we talked about where somebody got hurt, that happened on property 1. The insurance doesn't cover it. That particular property, whatever, it doesn't cover it. Those 4 other properties that are owned by that LLC are on the table to satisfy
Okay.
the judgment. So having each of them owned by a separate LLC even further protects from liability.
Now, so say you have 5, so this is a question because I'm guilty of this myself.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what you don't know at the time, and I had bought under my personal name,
Mm-hmm.
my first property, transferred it out. So I had to pay the transfer fee and all that. But so then I had multiple properties under an LLC at that point, right? So I had, let's say 3 under one LLC. But you obviously have insurance for each of those LLCs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if the insurance limits on, like, say, for example, property 1, right? Someone falls, gets injured, you're getting sued, right? This might be an insurance question. Do the limits on the other properties, would those come into play as well? Like if it's a business insurance policy?
They're all owned by the same LLC.
They're all owned by the same LLC.
Yeah.
Because I have some insurance policies that are intertwined, with higher limits due to multiple properties. So I wonder if that's the case. But I guess it would be the same thing. If it goes above and beyond that limit.
Yeah. And to be quite honest with you, I would need to look at the actual policy
Okay.
to make a determination.
More so a
there.
personal question.
I think, but that's a good question. But like anything else, I'll give the lawyer answer, which is like I need to look at this
yeah, it
right.
depends.
to see what
Yeah,
it
it
says.
depends.
But I think ideally, if you can do it, if you can make that determination before you make any moves, you want to have them as insulated as possible.
Okay.
Now,
what protection above and beyond an LLC? Would you have an overarching, corporation above these individual properties, or, what's the next phase or shield of protection?
Yeah.
Above that.
So that's a good question too. As far as corporate structure, there really isn't anything.
So would you do like an S corp or something like that?
That's
Or
more
is
for
that-
taxes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that
I
would
was
be more
gonna
of a
ask
tax.
on that.
Mhm.
Like, how many different vehicles, like, how many different entities are there for your options to own property in? And if that's an indefinite answer, we don't have to go through it. But I've seen people own property in trusts, in IRAs,
Yeah.
in LLCs, in LPs, in incorporated. I don't know. I know a very basic, shallow surface
Yeah.
rendering of what that means. What does that mean to own it in a trust?
So, oh man, if the trust conversation it could be its own podcast.
A living
Yeah.
trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like all over the place.
And that's not my specific area of expertise.
Okay.
The firm that I work at, We do a lot of estates and trust work, so I do basic estate planning,
Okay.
which includes trusts.
Would that be a shield? Is owning something in a trust a shield? Or is what they're using the entities for as
Right.
LLCs
So
for?
think of it right.
The same
how we were
utility.
just talking about the advantages of a corporation. If the property is owned by a trust, then the assets that are held within that trust are what could be exposed.
Got it.
Not
So
your
it's a
personal-
different
Okay.
vehicle.
Exactly, right.
Okay.
A trust is in. I'm sure there are probably some estates and trust lawyers out there who could explain this much better than I could. But
Okay.
the best way I explain it to people, because the concept of a trust is like it's difficult to wrap your head around.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's basically, I look at it like a separate bank account. That's the way
Okay.
it works in my mind.
Got it.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're putting all of your assets or a certain number of identified assets into a separate bank account, and those assets can only be distributed to certain beneficiaries, named beneficiaries, by a trustee who is the gatekeeper of the bank account. That
Got it.
person gets to make determinations on who gets what when. And the trust document usually, says when that's going to happen.
Oh, okay.
Right. You could, we have some interesting provisions in trust. I mean, a basic one
Yeah.
is, if you're a beneficiary,
Yeah.
you might get a certain payout when you're 25, and then another
I
payout
see.
when you're 40,
Okay,
and another payout when
yeah.
you're 50.
So it's an entirely different conversation
Totally different
than
conversation,
protection.
yeah.
Got it. So to narrow the conversation down to utility,
Mm-hmm.
it would be more LLC
Yeah.
and LP.
LLC, but it depends on your arrangement. You know what I mean? Some people have partnerships. They want to do it that way and have a limited
Yeah.
partnership.
So one of my clients, they were a group of 5 people, and there was one GP of the LP.
Mm-hmm.
So general partner of the limited partnership. And that was my only experience with that. So I didn't know why that was more advantageous to that group.
Your friend was the GP, or was it a separate company?
It was
that
my
the GP?
client who, when they signed the checks, it was their name, comma, general partner.
Yeah. So limited partnerships can only take action through their general partner.
And this was like these were multi-units.
Right.
So
So if you saw the name somebody signing is the general partner, limited partnerships can only act through their general partner. So you could have a bunch of different limited partners, but you need the general partner to.
Is that because his equity stake's higher? Is that why he's the general?
they were voted, I think.
Oh, they're just
it-
voted. So they all, if you have
Appointed,
4 and they're all 25%.
People are silent partners. They don't want to deal with accounting or making decisions on what gets, like which roof gets replaced. They have a GP handle all that.
Okay.
And that's just
So
the way that specific corporate structure works.
Right.
LLCs they have members. So your members make all the decisions, and then the operating agreement that you have will determine how the company operates. What
And that's-
percentage vote do you need to take?
That's
certain
your
actions
operating
and things
agreement.
like that,
It
right.
determines or dictates how this entity operates.
Exactly.
Okay.
But what I was going to say about your question, Mike, about what's the next level? So obviously you have this corporate entity that's set up to shield your personal assets, but there are ways that individuals or companies who are suing your company can pierce what's called the corporate veil. So you've got this wall that's set up that is, between basically what has happened in your personal assets. But that can be basically broken through if you as the person managing, operating, owning the company don't take certain actions.
Right.
The absolute easiest way to have the corporate veil pierced and to have your personal assets exposed is by not engaging in what's called corporate governance. So the short version of that is bookkeeping.
Okay.
Right? You've probably heard of a corporate minute book, or you could imagine what it is.
It's resonated with me because I heard that phrase spoken
Yeah.
this week, and it was pierce the
Right.
corporate veil, and I was like, what the heck does that
Yeah.
mean? So it's weird that you're bringing that up right
Well,
now.
I mean, it's important,
Yeah.
but that's like the extra layer, right? So, a lot of think about the whole purpose of a corporate entity, right? The law has allowed us to run businesses and engage in endeavors through this specific corporate entity because at some point some people got together and said, hey, it's not cool that if something happens while someone's running their business, their
They're
personal
gonna-
assets should
exact-
be.
yeah.
They should go
Yeah.
out, and be able to do that and not have to worry about it. But then over the course of time, people just have said, okay, well, we'll file the necessary paperwork with the state, and then basically just forget about it. We're not gonna do anything other than pay taxes, in the name of the corporation.
Yeah.
And if somebody comes and looks for proof, we're just gonna give them our certificate of organization, and then that'll be it.
So it
law
sounds
says
like
you have to do
LLCs are
more
good
than
enough, right? Like, are they Is that
Oh,
kind
and
of-
LLCs, yeah, there's no
way
real-
around it. You're not piercing through that.
Not piercing through it unless so what I'm getting at, I guess, is that you've got this corporate entity set up, but you can't just let it hang out there. You need to treat it like a living, breathing thing. And the way you do that is through keeping a corporate minute book that has annual meeting minutes, for example.
I was going to ask you about that.
yeah.
What if you're a sole proprietor? What do you do? Meet with yourself?
Well, no. So, I mean,
Do that every day.
that's a really good question. I mean, I guess you could, but you could do what's called a written, and most companies do this, written consents.
Got it.
In lieu of a meeting. So, in lieu of having a meeting, we're going to do this written consent. In your annual minutes, they don't really need to include anything too crazy. If there's anything big that happened that year you want to include in there. Most of the time they're just like boilerplate, but people don't do it. And then, if something goes wrong, one of the easiest ways for somebody to pierce that corporate veil is say, oh, turn over your corporate minute book. Let's see what you did the last 10 years.
Oh my God, I don't have one.
And you're like,
They're still keeping one.
yeah.
Well, I mean, it's at home.
It's at home.
When you write a written consent in lieu of a meeting, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Just a note like.
It's basically just a 1 or
I've
2
checked.
page document most of
Okay.
the time. But here's what I tell people, this never made sense to me, right? So people go see their accountants every year to do their taxes.
Yeah.
You have to do that. There's a deadline to do it,
Yeah.
right? And there's consequences if you don't do it. Well, people don't, for whatever reason, that have that are business owners. Some are better than others. Some do this, but there isn't any incentive to I'll go see my lawyer every year to make sure that my corporate book is up to date. You might go 10 years and you're not going to need that.
Yeah.
It's a fair
Right?
point.
You're
Yeah,
gonna
right.
need-
But then
you
whenever
might-
you do need it, it's like
Oh shit.
you're on the shit end of the stick.
Yeah.
We've had people come
Now
in
you're
that
piercing the veil.
they want to sell a company or something like. Anytime you're selling a business, the first thing that the buyer's going to ask for are your corporate records.
Yeah.
And they'll come to us and be like, we don't have any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have to recreate
And what do you
them.
do? Oh, you just recreate them at that
Yeah.
point?
Oh my.
We have to have conversations, and it becomes a very time-consuming,
Tedious.
You have to date that
expensive,
back
tedious-
how far?
It depends. It
Oh my
depends.
gosh.
Yeah, so I mean, you could imagine, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and some companies have been around since 60s, 70s. They were good for a while, and then there's a drop off, and there's a gaps, and so you have to have detailed conversations with the client about what happened, and making sure that everything is accurate, and that sometimes can, it can take a lot of time. It's also on
Yeah,
money.
and it's like even myself, like obviously I do real estate. Law is not my lane, obviously, but no one educated me when I was opening up my LLC that I needed to do a corporate book and to have certain minutes or sign a consent letter. No one really educates you in that because you can go right on InkFile and order an LLC in Pennsylvania, and it's like, okay, you're a limited liability company. We gave you an EIN. Go ahead and operate.
Yeah.
And they don't really. They might tell me, but I didn't read it.
So I've had clients that will contact me and say that they have done they already have an LLC. They'll say, right? They already have a corporation set up, and then I say, well, okay, send me what. Do you have a certificate of organization? Do you have your EIN? Do you have it? Like the very basic stuff, and they won't have it.
Yeah.
Or they'll say they had somebody else do it, and they don't know where it is. They need to get back to me, right? So, just filing the paperwork with the Department of State doesn't meet your corporate governance requirements, which is what I was just talking about. The state, and maybe through InkFile, there's other companies, you could pay extra for this. I don't know how they work, but you need to have bylaws, right? You need to have an operating agreement. If 60 days after you start the company, you're planning on buying a property, you should have a resolution authorizing the purchase of that property with the agreement of sale or an appraisal or something attached, any relevant documentation. That should all be neatly, taken care of in a book. That way.
What does a resolution do? What does that mean?
It's just documenting. It's documentation of action taken by the company, written documentation. Right?
Okay.
So think about it. If you purchase a property and then 10 years down the road, you don't know the details of it, or you don't, something goes wrong there. Again, something happens on the property. It's just another hole that an attorney could poke through to say, oh, when did the company ever actually authorize you it purchasing this?
Oh, okay.
It's a credibility thing, if nothing else.
Yes.
That you're not serious. You're not even doing the very basic corporate governance practices. How can you be a sophisticated company, like that type of stuff? If
So when you
nothing
guys
else.
start from, so say for example, you guys have a client, right? Those clients, do you guys have clients that obviously that are investors? So say they're going to say I'm buying a property. Well, do do you walk with them from like start to finish, like
Yeah.
to close? So like you're making sure. And do you guys keep those files in place for them, or
Yep.
okay?
And I prefer it to be that way. So your situation when you said nobody talked to you about that, I want people to like come to me during and before the process. I think a lot of people think of attorneys as, you go to a lawyer after things have already gone wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not the way that it should be.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
I like to collaborate with people, obviously on the law,
Yeah.
but I'm a business attorney.
Yeah.
Right? So
right.
a lot of my clients aren't just looking at me for my legal advice; they're looking to me for certain business advice too. And if you're only coming to me after you've already made certain decisions, there's only so much that I can
like
do
preventative
for
maintenance.
you. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Question. So, real life scenario. I had an LLC with someone. We owned a property together. They unfortunately passed, and I'm trying to find our operating agreement, and I can't find it. So, I don't know if I own it with right of survivorship or not.
Who prepared the operating agreement?
I reached out to that attorney, and he doesn't have it. So, I don't know if
Do
it's.
you know if one was ever created?
Yes.
It was. You signed it, but you don't have a copy of it, and neither does your lawyer.
The one, he's not my
Vic would
lawyer.
have kept a copy of it.
Yeah.
I know. Well, I mean, this is 2015.
No, I know.
No, it's
Yeah.
okay. So that's a common situation that
Yeah.
we encounter. At one point, a company had bylaws and they don't know where they're at. So basically, what you do is you prepare what's called amended and restated bylaws, or in that case, an amended and restated operating agreement. And is it just the two of you that were members?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, most operating agreements with 2-member LLCs, we have, unless there was something in there that was very specific to your circumstances, most of the time they're pretty boilerplate. So you could do an amended and restated set of, or an operating agreement, and then that would serve as the company's governing document.
I think how we owned it, how we took ownership would be very specific. So I don't know if we have to do an amended operating agreement that might be advantageous to now his estate would own a portion versus I believe it to be right or survivorship where I would have 100%
Yeah.
ownership. So it's like a little hairy
So-
situation.
It is, but it's an interesting. I mean, something that people don't really think about either is what's called a members agreement. I doubt that you had one of those. A lot of
Not that I
people don't.
recall. Yeah.
Yeah. So your operating agreement's very basic, very boilerplate for the most part, unless you, like I said, you want something in there that's unique to your situation. It governs how the company operates. But what you're talking about is what's called like a triggering event. So let's say that you and I are partners in a business. Okay, we're each entitled to 50%. And at some point when I'm 35, I say, hey, Anna, we have a really successful thing going here. I'm about ready to retire. I'm going to go down to Florida, just kick my checks down there, and
Nice.
I'll have my feet up on the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's probably
fair.
not okay though, right? Like if you're doing all the work
Yeah.
and I'm sitting down in Florida,
Yeah, you're done.
most people wouldn't be cool with that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what do you do in the event that happens? What do you do in the event somebody goes bankrupt? What do you do in the event somebody is going through a divorce? What do you do in the event that your business partner wants to retire, voluntarily quit?
Things you don't really think of, I guess.
Exactly. So what we always tell people is plan the divorce while you're still married, right? Or plan the divorce before you get married. So
Oh boy.
the
That's romantic.
yeah,
It's
well,
called
Yeah.
prenup.
I'm a business lawyer, right?
Right.
So we
No
get down to
emotions
brass
here.
tacks now.
Yeah.
But that document, the members agreement, is what you want to have in place to determine what happens in the event that one of those triggering events takes place. And most of the time, it triggers a buyout.
Sure.
So that your situation should have been properly handled probably through that document, having that in place.
Yeah, it's happening right now, so I'm learning
Yeah.
as I go through it. Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you so I'm gonna imagine that some of your investors, you guys are constructing a lot of leases, right?
Yep.
So what are some of the more important components to that? Is there like a standardized like Pennsylvania lease? I know it can vary
This is
by
a good
state
question. Yeah.
based on like eviction, for example, right? Like the number of days that you're allowed to, that you have to give them notice. Like, how do you construct that? Because
The most important thing, if it's another lawyer answer, it depends, right? I have people that come to me that want to put leases in place. They have a property that they're going to lease to a relative or something like that, right? They don't necessarily want the big lease document. They just want some basic terms, and they'll have very specific components to it. So we do those like from the ground up. But if we're talking like a retail lease or a commercial lease, there are a couple of things that you want to really pay attention to. The default provisions are always super important. So you need to know whether you're the buyer or seller. What does this document say constitutes a default on my behalf? And then what are the consequences? That's super important right off the bat. Confession of judgment language is very important. Confession of judgment is a concept that's not, as I understand it, it's not allowed in a lot of other states, but it is in Pennsylvania. And if you have the correct, if you're the lessor of a property, you want to be able to evict somebody and kick them out with as little hassle as possible.
This is commercial.
Right.
These are
We're
commercial
talking
leasing?
about, like, commercial,
Okay,
right.
gotcha.
Right. No, so not residential. There's a whole different set of laws that govern evictions for residential properties. But when you're talking about commercial, if you get a confession of judgment clause in the lease that says judgment in possession and monetary judgment, you sign that and you're the tenant, you're basically you're allowing the lessor to basically go into court with the lease and say, hey, they violated one of these provisions. They're gone. You don't really have to provide any notice depending on the way that it reads.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you need
They
to be
have
really
to sign.
careful.
They don't have to sign that though, right?
Do you get any resistance from that?
Yeah, but it depends on what side I'm on, right? If I'm
Sure.
representing the tenant, I'm like, get it out of
Absolutely
there.
not.
Like it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
but,
right. Okay.
But it depends on the circumstance. Some people aren't in a position to negotiate that. And if
Interesting.
if I'm representing the lessor, we want it in there.
Yeah.
And then for some people who it's not as big of a concern, right? I mean, if you've been doing business with somebody for a long time, you might be less concerned that they're going to not pay you for a certain amount of time than if this is a brand new tenant, you don't know much about them. You want to have as much protection there as possible to get a judgment for either unpaid rent or to get them off the property and to have possession and retake possession. That's probably the biggest one that I look for in leases.
Like residential, is there a minimum? Do you know what the minimum is in Pennsylvania
For
eviction?
I think it's 10 days.
I was going to say 10 days after you post a notice to quit.
Yeah, and I haven't done many evictions just because that's not most of the real estate I do is like
Not your lane,
transactional type
right,
stuff.
okay.
But there's a whole separate landlord-tenant act in Pennsylvania that
Right.
applies to residential.
I think it's like
leases.
municipality specific too. I think different municipalities have different.
Well, it
rental
starts at the
laws?
magistrate if you're going to evict someone.
Yeah.
That's where it starts, and obviously you're the local magistrate.
So you wouldn't run it by? Well, I guess if you're representing me and that you're someone that I'm working with closely, then I'd be obviously something that I would run by you before going to the magistrate. I would assume, right?
Exactly, and understand too. We do residential leases. The Landlord-Tenant Act applies, regardless of what you see. What I'm saying?
Yeah.
Those two documents kind of work together. It's not like because we have residential lease, you disregard that law.
Okay.
You kind of have to have. They're both on the table when something goes wrong. You're considering Landlord-Tenant Act, and you're also considering what the lease says.
Okay.
I gotcha.
So one doesn't supersede the other. You're just both considered.
Well, you can't put anything unlawful or illegal in a.
Yeah.
Right. You can't agree to something that's illegal.
Right.
And that's like one of the first things you learn in law school, right?
Yeah.
It's like such a basic concept, but like they were like, you come into contracts class day one.
But you
and they're
agreed
like,
to it.
Hey,
It's
if I put
not
something
legal.
in paper that you're gonna buy a whole bunch of drugs off me, and I never,
Right.
and I never get paid, can I bring this into
Yeah,
court? And
oh my
you're like,
God.
I don't know, can you? And then you're like, no, absolutely not. Right?
That's funny.
You had mentioned a key point, I think, just around the municipalities, right? Kind of want to pivot here to, how that can affect the short-term rental investors, right? Obviously, I've been
Heavily,
very
yeah.
familiar, with, short-term rentals. I've been using different platforms for about 5-6 years. And, it varies based on the area, based on the market. You have some of the northern beaches that don't have any ordinances against short-term rentals. You go down to Florida, just about almost every beach does, unless the building was constructed or grandfathered in against that ordinance. So obviously in Pittsburgh, there's still a lot of Airbnbs and whatnot, people come into the area for a short period of time.
Yep.
Maybe give some feedback around that, because you said you did do some municipality work before, right?
Yep. So I think what people are purchasing a property, they have all these great ideas. They want to have an Airbnb, they want to rent it, they want to do whatever, but they're thinking about the agreement of sale, they're thinking about the tax implications, they're thinking about all this high level stuff, but they're forgetting probably the one aspect that's going to affect them the most, which is the local law, the municipality that you're purchasing the property in. And those laws really control what you can do with the property. So making sure, first and foremost, I guess, if you're buying a property with the intent to use it as an Airbnb or if really for anything, if you want to use it as a retail space, you need to look at the zoning ordinance. You need to make sure the zoning ordinance that you're looking at and the zoning map and everything is current. It's up to date. You're going to want to know that, obviously, the types of uses that are permitted in the area where your property is located. And if they're not permitted, what steps do you have to take to, most of the time it could be like a conditional use, or if it's not permitted at all and it's permitted in a separate zoning district, you might need to go for a variance, which those are very difficult to get. So we have clients and we have situations where people buy property under the assumption they can do one thing with it, and
they kind of screwed at that point.
Don't they have a due diligence period where someone would research that? Or
Well,
you would think.
Yes, you would think, and that's when you're kind of supposed to hash all those issues out.
Yeah.
Is that something you guys do? If you know the intent of the investor and what they're trying to purchase, and you're already working with them,
yeah,
you guys will do that due diligence.
I do it quickly because I'm familiar with the way, like, I know how to research municipal laws and find them very quickly. So for me, it's just,
I'm gonna start bothering you then.
Huh?
On certain things, I'm gonna start calling you.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
I'm happy to help. Like,
yeah.
It can be overwhelming if you just go on. First of all,
just counting websites.
Tons of turnover with a lot of local governments, right?
Yeah,
right.
I mean, think about just in Newcastle how many different municipalities.
I don't even know. Yeah.
And think about how many people have been in like elected positions out there and doing all those different things. Like, so record keeping is not great, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Right.
You go to their websites for help, they might not have everything there.
Or even have a website.
Their ordinances could be very, very old, which can be good and bad. Sometimes they're good if you're a lawyer because they might have
those
ordinances
issues
that
don't
are
exist
actually,
yet.
Yeah, I mean, I had a real estate situation actually in one municipality in Pennsylvania, and you've probably heard of the Municipalities Planning Code, the MPC. It's a very important state law, and I've
heard of it now.
Yeah, you've heard of it now. But the property issue we were dealing with in this municipality, I went and I said, okay, well, I got to look at their ordinances, and their ordinances predated the MPC. So technically, everything that they had in their zoning ordinance was illegal.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
And they don't think to like update anything.
No,
Because why would they?
Exactly. But yeah, I was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. I was reading it and was like, this just on its face doesn't make any sense. And I was like, I wonder when the paper it was on was super old.
Yeah.
But I was like, I wonder how old these actually are. And I was like, oh man,
like reading an antique.
You realize there was a law enacted after you passed these estate law that would supersede everything you have in here.
See, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Stumbling on some history. Was it in Lawrence County?
No.
Oh, okay. Mercer?
No, but I probably shouldn't say this.
Okay. Okay.
I'm just fascinated by the fact
I know, me too.
that, also,
Well, think about it. You call, let's say you have an issue, like you've got like a boundary dispute or something like that, and you call the township or whatever. Most people take what those people tell them as like fact or law, right? They're like, oh, well, you need to go through this product. You got to do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
But not a lot of people get an attorney or themselves look to make sure that what that person is saying is
like
A,
verify it
in their ordinances, and B, that their ordinances are lawful.
That's right.
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 Yeah, because you don't know what you don't know. I would never
Exactly.
know to ask those questions.
No, most people just want to, they'll do whatever they got to do to make.
It's written down, so therefore it's verified.
Exactly. Or not even that, but this is what my predecessor told me.
Yeah.
So now I'm telling you.
That's pretty crazy.
It's nuts.
Yeah, I'm like my wheels are spinning. I wanted to bring it back to the entity conversation that we started off with.
Yeah.
So, what are the tax benefits of the different entities you can purchase investment properties in?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if you're purchasing properties, it's tough because
buying
you're
and
always going to
holding.
pay the transfer tax and everything. That's the main concern that we get with clients. I want to avoid paying the transfer tax.
Oh, you're when you already own a property and you're deeding it to the entity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So you sell it to yourself for $1.
Right, that
Yeah.
type of thing. But you still have to pay the transfer tax on it, and that goes off of like the assessed value,
Ugh.
not the
Yeah.
not the purchase price. So that's
So-
kind of I've
You
had
saying like intermediary work, like 1031s, or what were you?
No, so
Yeah, what-
I'm asking. Okay, like when you purchase, it's your entity. You
Right.
know, MCR is buying a multi-unit. So it's LLC. So what's
Right.
the benefit? Is there a benefit between an LLC and an LP? Or is it
No, I mean
taxed
there
the
might be some
same?
creative way. I mean, there might be some creative ways to get some tax benefits between, but as far as differences between like an LP and an LLC,
No.
I don't think that there
it's taxed
are
or
any.
viewed the same?
Yeah, like an accountant might be able to probably answer that a
Yeah.
little bit more
Got it.
in a sophisticated way, but a lot of people do like pass through taxes, right, on their like
Yeah.
business entities. But at the end of the day, you're still, you're as far as I know, unless there could be creative ways, I guess.
Got it.
My
Okay, so
answer
it's
is
more of an
accounting. Yeah, I would.
question.
If somebody
Okay.
came to me with that question, I would say, hey, you probably should.
Refer to an accountant.
Yeah.
Got it.
For-
Okay.
So do you guys do intermediary work? Do you guys do like 1031s and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's not
minimum
something we
exchange?
do often.
Okay.
So you have an account, a non-interest bearing account where they put the money in, and then when they nominate their properties, you guys pay it through you.
Yeah, I think we've done those. We don't do them often though. It's not something that I've worked on hands on.
So I don't know if you have any experience in this or not, or you've had any clients in the past, that might have purchased a portfolio, for example, right? The portfolio has value that's tied to it based off of obviously the value of each property individually, but also the rent roll, right? So if that rent roll that the seller is listing and marketing, right? So we'll say it's 100,000, just for example, and you close on the deal, lo and behold, the actual rent roll is 60,000. Right now, if they lied on the leases and they made up stuff and that sort of stuff, I mean, what type of legal guards are in place for the buyer? Is that something civil that they're able to go after? Is it criminal?
If it's
fraud?
a misrepresentation, for sure. But I mean, obviously, you want to. If you're the buyer, you want to see those rent rolls, right? I would.
What if they lie? What if they?
Oh, you mean they forged?
If
like
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard of this.
Yeah, is there a
past.
clause, correct me if I'm wrong, for a year's time, that if they didn't live up to what they said the income property produced, that they could sell or give the property back and get their money back?
I mean, I don't know if it's that.
I mean, that's not a
straightforward and
sophisticated,
easy. Yeah, I mean,
description, but I remember,
That's like a fraudulent misrepresentation,
it is.
right? I mean, if somebody is purposefully forging rent roll amounts to induce you
to buy it,
buy.
value, yeah.
right,
You're buying cash flow anyways, right?
Right.
And if
so that would be like a
they're
fraudulent
providing you with income statements
misrepresentation.
and you're looking at it like, okay, wow, this looks great. Numbers make sense. If they send you the leases or, some of these guys, some of these landlords are, 80 years old. They're just liquidating their portfolios. They don't have, some of them have had the same tenant in there for 20 years.
Yeah.
Who knows what that lease looked like. So, I mean, if they're just saying that it's X and you're not validating that based on deposits or any form of documentation.
Yeah, I mean, so I always ask for the rent rolls and also like the leases, right?
Right.
You want to see, and again, like to your point, they could, I guess, somebody could
If they
forge all
did,
of
yeah,
that.
they did that
Yeah.
with freaking Bellevue.
Yeah.
Like they tried to change they gave me the original lease, and then they which
that
had
was
a certain
warped,
amount of
yeah.
deposits on it. The girl knew that I was going to come in there and I was renovating the whole place and I was going to increase the rent based off the rehab. Well, here she ended up increasing the owner did.
Yeah.
Or the property manager increased the deposit from $850, or it was $1,850, reduced it to $850,
Right.
or vice versa. 'Cause she was trying to get more, so
It was more advantageous to her.
it was
to
more
get
advantageous
her
there.
money.
Yeah, she had put it at $1,850, so that I had to give her $1,850. Meanwhile, it was really $850.
Yeah.
So it's like
That's a like a fraudulent misrepresentation.
yeah,
Oh, that whole thing.
That's a
was-
civil.
that whole thing was a nightmare.
We've talked
panning
about that
out,
for
but-
5 episodes because it was such a crazy experience.
Well, that's usually how you learn. Sometimes the hard
It was
way.
wild.
Right?
It's so much
like,
content in that whole experience
Every single
from each angle.
right.
Yeah.
Do you? I mean, have you encountered any like seller disclosure issues with like residential properties?
Knock on wood. No.
Yeah.
Oh God, I don't want to.
So
deal
what
with
if
that.
somebody
Those are-
what if somebody
those are big
misrepresents that?
in this area?
What's the
too.
statute on that?
Casually knocked.
Oops.
The real estate seller disclosure law. Mm-hmm. So I mean, you probably know generally what that says, which is that if there's a material defect on the property that you know about or should know about as a seller, that you have to disclose it on that seller disclosure.
How can you prove that they should know about it? I guess, like, say water.
It's tough.
Without a rereasonable doubt. That's what all the brokers say.
No,
Well, because like you'll
That's what
buy
they tell me.
that's a criminal standard.
you'll buy a property, for example, and if there's water.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I am from Newcastle.
Yeah. We don't know the criminal.
Like if there's water pouring into a basement, right? You
Yeah.
know, you're in the spring, and they
Yeah.
patch it up, they put some extra dry lock on it, and
Yeah.
next thing you know, you close on it and everything looks good. They vacuumed all the water out, you close, you end up getting a heavy rain during the summer and it starts pouring in.
Yep.
What do you do there?
It-
I mean,
it-
and
it
they didn't
is-
put that on the disclosure.
It is in a place like Pittsburgh too. I mean,
Yeah.
every basement
all this-
here
with
has
all the-
water in
It's
it. Like,
notoriously a wetland.
it is
you know?
so tough to. I mean, to answer your question, it's really difficult to prove. In most of those cases,
Did they
end up
occupy?
settling.
Did they see it? Things like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had situations though where we've actually talked to neighbors who would say like, yeah, we went into the basement prior to the seller owning it. So this would be the previous owner, and they have testified to evidence of there being water damage.
Oh,
in
you had the
basement.
neighbors in
Yeah.
court?
Neighbors
Yeah,
love ratting people out.
So-
Oh, yeah,
right,
especially
that's-
landlords.
that's
They
a-
love ratting out
That's a
landlords.
situation where the seller definitely knew about it, but even if they're saying they didn't, you have the neighbor who can testify to, well, clearly they did, and if they didn't, they should have, because they had everything.
negligence
they had,
at that point.
I went into their basement one time and they had everything up on shelves off the ground. Like,
Yeah,
that's
right.
pretty clear
Yeah,
that
it
there's
just so
water in the
happens that
basement.
your washer and dryer are
Yeah.
on stilts. you know?
Wild how
So-
that
Yeah.
happens.
But most of the
I was
time,
just too tall.
those are difficult situations. But I mean, again, like I was saying earlier, if you have any doubt or you're purchasing a property, like it's worth it to like get that seller disclosure sheet in front of somebody who's like obviously with a professional mind, right, that knows real estate, but also who's looking at it from like through a legal lens. That can identify, okay, in the past, these are some things I've seen people kind of like wiggle their way around, or like, you know, I've dealt with one before. It's like they tried to get around it because they said, well, we represented the buyer, and it's, you know, we were like, you didn't disclose water damage, and they're saying, well, I put that there was a French drain. Well, you know, if I would have seen that seller disclosure sheet before they purchased it, you could follow up and say, why did you need that French drain? What was it for? And why didn't you put that on the disclosure sheet?
Can they lie about that? Having a French drain? I don't know. I don't even know anything like
Can't lie, but
structurally
can't
around
lie.
that.
Some
I mean,
people
can
leave
you
things
prove?
blank.
How
Some
do you
peop-
prove there's a French drain outside? Is there a? I don't know if there's a drain or.
I don't know if there's like a way to
Well,
do
through
it
discovery,
with
you
radar.
would ask who installed it or who put it in, and then you get in
Okay,
touch
so
with that
then, yeah, you
person.
can't-
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Um,
So, but I guess my thing with seller, excuse me, with seller disclosure, it most of the time, litigating those cases becomes somewhat cost prohibitive, because you have to get, so everybody thinks it's so simple when they start out. Oh, I
Right.
bought this house and I got water in the basement. I should be able to go right into court and tell this to a judge. Well, that's
No.
not how it works.
It's not that simple.
And by the time you get in front of, most of the time the amounts are below $35,000, so that arbitration threshold, you're in an arbitration setting.
Is it above
and-
35,000?
If it's 35 or more, more than 35,000, then you're in court of common pleas. But if it's any less than that, then you go in front of an arbitration panel, which is basically just like a jury, but it's 3 attorneys instead of lay people. And you know, they've by the time you get to that point, most people spend like equal to, if not more than the repair
What they're
costs.
suing for.
Yeah, and then they're
Oh,
like,
that kind of stinks.
mhm.
I had a situation. One of my clients, she bought a house that sat very close to the road. It was very old. The foundation was river rock, and they had a decorative stone in the front yard that we thought was just a decorative stone. But through her experience of living in this home, someone actually veered off the road and crashed into her house, into her kitchen. And I guess her neighbors eventually told her, your house has gotten hit 7 times.
oh my goodness.
And the entirety of its existence. Like,
Yeah.
it's documented in the newspapers. But the seller never disclosed that. And she asked me, can I sue? Because, I mean, she could have died. I mean, it was in her kitchen. It was daylight. She has kids.
Oh my gosh.
Well, not to mention, there's probably I would imagine there would have to be some foundational, right? If they crashed into their house,
yeah,
well,
right.
there could have been
the river
foundation.
rock was not these are like boulders.
Yeah.
So they weren't affected. The car was obviously more delicate than the River Rock.
Yeah.
But what was damaged was like not the foundation, but the structure, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the actual framing.
Yeah.
And her insurance covered the repair, but I mean, now she has to disclose, oh, this house has been hit, you know, in the course of its existence 9 times now.
Mm-hmm.
So she asked me, like, what can I do about this? And I was like, I don't know.
You know, I don't know all the different boxes offhand that you'd have
Yeah.
to check for the seller disclosure. I haven't dealt with that situation before. I'd be interested to now knowing that fact pattern, going back through the seller disclosure sheet
Mm-hmm.
and seeing if there would be something where I'd think, oh, that might be the place to disclose it. But I mean, if you think about it, it's material defects like to the property,
Right.
right? So you're thinking about things like continued water in the basement or a foundational
Which is a
issue that's been
loophole.
covered up.
Yes. So people don't have to disclose when people pass away in Pennsylvania in the house. They don't have to
If
disclose it.
if it's haunted,
Right. If it's haunted.
like stuff
that
like
something?
that. Yeah,
or
I
it was
definitely
a crime
remember.
house. They sold
You have
drugs.
any
you don't-
haunted? You have any? Can you actually
I would want
sue
to
for
live in a
that?
haunted house. I'd be like, oh, sweet. Like, you could probably disclose that to me.
Unless you're watching like something.
I think that'd be cool to own a haunted
I mean,
house.
no,
but
seriously, can you actually sue for that? Like, if
I think
it's-
that I remember this is another law school because in law school you just learn about like the random stuff. that
Wild
you probably
situations.
don't ever encounter.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did. I think that somebody. I don't know if I've never dealt with that. I don't know if it's ever happened in Pennsylvania. I'm fairly confident you don't need to disclose because how can you prove your house is haunted?
It's not a material defect.
So a lot of people don't even believe in it, but I'm pretty sure that somebody like there's in some state there's like a Supreme Court case on it. Like somebody like took it the whole way.
I'm going to Google that later.
Really?
Yeah.
In California, you
There's
have to
definitely
disclose
cases.
it. Yeah.
Oh, you have to.
Yep. It varies state by
You have to
state.
disclose whether your house is haunted.
In California, if someone dies in it or if it's haunted or if you believe
I
it
just
to be
don't know how you
possessed.
could even prove that.
I
Whether
could see
somebody's just out of their mind. or
Cali's
they're just
a wild place. I don't know.
yeah.
I can see if like someone dying that actually like you can prove that happened or not. But
True. Right.
hauntings,
But
you're getting
haunting,
into people's
I mean, it's
beliefs.
like-
Like
No, I've represented people who were selling their house and people were murdered in the house. And that's documented. But I don't have to disclose that.
Oh, so that's
I
documented.
do out of a moral respect, but I
Yeah.
don't. You know, I was like, hey, just let you know someone died
Yeah,
here.
no, that's.
I don't
that
have to tell
crosses
you
the
that,
line
but
for me
yeah.
too. If someone got
Like
whacked
a,
in there,
like
I
a
don't.
very, you know, dramatic, violent murder happened in a
Wow.
house.
that's like Amityville Horror.
Yeah, it didn't sell, but it's rented now.
It's, in
It's the
Newcastle.
renter's problem.
Yep.
It's in Newcastle.
I told the lady it was,
It's on the east side.
you know, I parted ways with that client, but I told everyone who came, hey, just letting you know what happened. Some people didn't care.
And that
They're
was
like,
just
whatever.
your moral. You felt like you had. To,
I could not. I couldn't
Yeah.
sell it or rent it to somebody without them knowing.
I mean, how'd you frame that? Like, how did you?
I'm saying, hey, just being honest with you.
Hey, this is a
you
beautiful
can Google
staircase.
this.
Somebody got murdered on it.
I'm not going to go into the case because it was a very dramatic and violent, but
Oh my
like
gosh.
like someone was there for days. Like it was bad.
Jeez.
Somebody was there for what?
Like a body was there for days.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So in October we could talk about it, but not today.
We're on Halloween. time,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's like to your point. I mean there are some things too where it's just like your reputation. You know, it's not necessarily
Yes.
like do I
Sure.
need to disclose this by
And that
law?
supersedes a sale. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Right. You don't want to be that person.
no, absolutely not.
And I try to like I said, when I'm talking with clients, I like to collaborate, not just on legal issues. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I try to like think of things out within the legal context and outside of them. So, and I think that has served people that I've worked with pretty well. You know, because I don't care who you are. If you're working with somebody and trying to make money and you know, turn a profit, you want creative thinkers and you want people who are thinking, you know, in a bunch of different angles on
Sure.
things. And so that's always kind of been my part of my pitch, I guess, to people is, you know, I'm not just going to be like within the lines and thinking, you know, of one particular way about things.
There's
you know,
many
just-
ways to get to it.
There's many ways to
Yeah.
get there, yeah, and it's about using the law to help, you know, facilitate that. So that's kind of, you know, the way I look at what I do.
What's the, depending on which side you're on, okay, so what is the most common reason your clients get sued from a real estate standpoint?
I want to use this answer. A lot of my clients don't get sued.
Oh!
yeah,
Because you do your due diligence
yeah.
up
No,
front.
I'm
right?
not. Yeah, and I'm not even kidding you. Most of and I don't really do a ton of litigation. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Because you protect your clients.
Right. So, but most of the people that we're involved in litigation with, we got brought in way after, after the damage was done. I'm proud to say I haven't been in a situation yet where I've helped somebody start something and it's gone south for any reason, where I can look back and say, like, I was involved in that from the start and something happened. Now, it's a complicated thing when obviously you want to know why you get sued, but one of the most common questions that I will get from people is like, can I get sued for this, or can somebody sue me? Well, you don't need to have justification, or you don't need to have like legal merit to sue somebody, right? Like you can't bring a frivolous lawsuit, but just because somebody could be totally wrong doesn't mean that they can't initiate a legal proceeding.
We live in a sue-happy culture.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So that's like a tough one that I get from people all the time. So I always say it's important to just do everything that you can from the outset to eliminate opportunities for people to poke holes in whatever it is that you're doing, and just to protect yourself so that doesn't happen.
Okay.
But
cool. So to wrap up, this was a great episode, by the way.
It was.
Okay. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah. So when you buy property, buy it. It's recommended that you buy it in an LLC.
Yeah.
And to be educated on what that requires. So you want an operating agreement.
Yeah.
You want a resolution. You want good bookkeeping.
Yeah.
And remind me again, you want a letter. What's it called again?
So like to sum it up, you want to make sure that obviously you're just like talking to an attorney who knows what you need to be doing. Your attorney, your accountant, make sure that you're, talking about any considerations from an accounting, like a tax standpoint. Maybe there is a certain business, a business organization that makes more sense than another. And then don't just incorporate. Don't just file the documents with the Department of State. Make sure that you're keeping track of your annual meeting minutes. If you're purchasing a property, make sure you have the appropriate resolutions. Make sure you have an initial resolution appointing officers of the company. You want to have a president, a secretary, a treasurer. That way when you go to the bank and they say, who's the president of your company? I don't have a president. We have members. They're going to be like, well, what does that mean? Right. So just, all those considerations. And it's worth it to just get in touch with somebody at the outset. That way you're saving yourself time and money later, and you're doing things the right way from the start. It's like getting into good habits.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, if you need them, get a hold of Vic, and thank you for listening to Cashed In.